Well, welcome to a new Harry's Garage, and today's video is going to be a bit different because I'm going to give you a tour around my Paris-Dakar bikes. Behind me are these 6 winning bikes that span from the very first Paris-Dakar in 1979 all the way to 1998. These are the bikes that won Paris-Dakar. And it's an event I've long been fascinated with, and I think I said in the previous video, I've been into bikes since I was about 11. I got my first motorbike when I was 11. Parents had a place in Wales, and right next door was this forestry commission land, and it was on a really steep hillside and had these fast tracks and these steep, really steep rocky inclines, and I was allowed to just have free rein of this, so a motorbike was just ace when I just used to hoon around at weekends over there. So that's how I really got into bikes. And then with the Paris-Dakar thing, what struck me was the actual bikes that competed in Dakar. There were customer versions of these bikes. And I thought it would be really good to get a collection together. They're all in the works colours. I hadn't seen it done before. So 2 years ago, I put this collection together. So what I'm going to do now is take each individual bike outside and then show you it in more detail on how it matched the actual bike that won that year's Dakar. So this is the Yamaha XT500. This particular example is built 1978, first registered in 1979. And this is the bike that really started it all back in the day. Thierry Sabine, who created Paris-Dakar, used to compete on one of these in other events and basically broke down in a desert in Africa one time and had an awful long time to think about things and basically put together the idea of Paris-Dakar. What he wanted to do was create an event that lasted like 3 weeks, and it would start in Paris and finish in Dakar, the event we sort of knew today. And this was the choice of bike back at the time. There was very few other bikes around that were sort of suitable. Yamaha's created these bikes, only their second ever 4-stroke engine. The idea was they used to do all these 2-strokes, but they had pretty awful fuel consumption. You couldn't really get any range. If you're going to do a 10,000 kilometre event, you want fuel economy is quite important, as well as the suspension, etc., to deal with the ruts. There are a few mods they had to do to the bikes before competing. First thing they had to do is change the fuel tank. This holds 8.8 litres. Well, that's not very good when you've got 400 kilometre stages, so a much bigger tank went on there. What else? The horsepower, they didn't really alter the horsepower because they wanted reliability. So this puts out 32 horsepower, which in a 140 kilo bike gets you along quite nicely. This does about 100 miles an hour. So it had reasonable performance for the size of thing. They were known in the day as the big thumper because you had kickstart and this lovely single cylinder engine. It's actually dry sumped. You put oil up here and you drain it down there. It's an utter joy actually. It's very light, 140 kilos, feels like an overpowered bicycle. Reasonable suspension travel compared to bikes of the day. The upswept exhaust, so that doesn't get in the way. You can tell an off-road bike basically because they always have a bigger front wheel. So this is a 21-inch front wheel and the big space between the mudguards, it doesn't get full up of mud and things. And this bike, with a Frenchman, Cyril Neville, won the 1979 Paris-Dakar event. He also won again in 1980 as well. And back in those days, this was a very French event. It was joyous, really. The other things competing there was road-going BMWs, Renault 4s, Range Rovers, and that sort of thing. It was the early days. It's known as the Innocence in French, the early days of Paris-Dakar. So, right, that's the Yamaha XT500. Let's get another bike out. Very different bike this time. So this is the BMW R80 GS Paris-Dakar edition. This particular bike dates from 1984, but a bike very similar to this won the event in 1981. And the rider was Hugo Orial, and he'd competed in the 79 event on an XT500 and thought, hang on a minute, we need a bigger bike for the long distance stuff, a faster bike. So he then competed on the BMW, came second in 1980, but then won it in 1981. So there is a big change from the type of bike, the little XT500. This is twin cylinder, 800cc. It's not crazily tuned or anything. It's only 50 horsepower, 56 newton meters, but it has real reliability. It has that long leg stance of a typical BMW R series, and I can see how it won. Very oddly, the main thing they had to do to it was extend the suspension. If you actually see the works bikes that have competed in Dakar, they have much longer travel suspension than on this bike. And they were very proud at the launch of this bike. They had this mono-shock suspension, mono lever as they term it. So on the other side there's no swinging arm, it's just attached by this single shocker and this shaft drive down here. All very reliable, but didn't quite give them the suspension travel they needed when they're competing at Paris-Dakar. So the Dakar works bikes are really quite different, but they were very successful. BMW won it with, as I say, with R80 in 81. They didn't win it in 82, we'll come to that in a moment, but they won it again in 83 and 84 and 85. In the last 2 years there was an ace motocross rider, he's a three-time world champion, Gaston Reha, and he competed in the 125 World Motocross Championship. He was only 5'4", and when you see the size of the bike next to him, it was so long, the suspension on it, that he couldn't actually touch the ground when he was on it. And you see in old films of Dakar that he has to go side saddle as he comes into a regulation where he has to have his things stamped, and then he goes side saddle and jumps off it. And he really struggled to start the bikes because in Dakar they throw away the electric starter and things because they want lightweight. But no one argued the way he rode the bike, and I say he won it 2 years on the trot on this BMW. This particular bike is 1984. When BMW were doing so well with the GS and winning at Dakar, they decided to bring out a celebrationally limited edition, and this is this one, the Paris-Dakar. So this has an enormous tank, 32 litre tank on it, and I'm really chuffed because Gaston Reha actually signed this tank. I've got the signature here. It's all stripped down, it's single seat. I've never seen this little regulatory sort of lever toolkit on the back. So this is really a very original bike, just how I like them. It's great to ride. I mean, the other thing that changed in this day, this has more performance with its 50 horsepower. Its top speed has gone over 100 miles an hour. They quote 104 miles an hour, but they had to develop a new tyre with Metzler to work on this sort of bike at this sort of weight. So a great thing. It's slightly odd when I actually drive it off-road because it is limited on suspension, but as I say, it's the long-legged ability, and it's actually super light. This is only about 170 kilos, which is very light for an 800cc bike. Right, I'll get the winner from 1982 out next. It's a bit cold, that's why it's running like that. But this is the Honda XL 500R. And this is the Paris-Dakar edition that came out in 1984 to celebrate the win in 1982. Now, Paris-Dakar 1982 was a bit of a landmark year because a certain individual got lost in the desert, and this became global news. It was Mark Thatcher, and with Margaret Thatcher Prime Minister of the UK, the world suddenly got to know about the Paris-Dakar because Mark was lost for 4 days in the desert, and there was constant news about this, and the papers got hold of it, and people got to know about Paris-Dakar and this world's toughest race, and you could actually die on it. So that's really made the Paris-Dakar world famous, and it sort of took off in 1982. It was also a year when they tried a new bit of desert, Tenere desert, and that took its toll on a number of competitors that actually finished the event. And the BMWs were favourite to win the bike class again that particular year. but unfortunately Oriol broke down in the desert. They had gearbox problems, and his other works driver broke down, and that left the field free for this little bike to win, which was the last time a simple single cylinder engine won Dakar back in the period before they actually became smaller bikes, but that's another story. But back in the period, this wasn't expected to win that year, but it introduced this little XL500. It introduced motocross type suspension. So like on the Yamaha XT500, that had the twin shock suspension. Twin shock was taken over with this monoshock and this swinging arm, single swinging arm here with the shock absorber hidden away under here, because it offered much more suspension travel. And the same thing at the front. You will see at the front where the wheels bolted onto the forks, they're extended down. You got much more suspension travel with this. And this was actually a very light bike. The XT500, as I say, was about 142 kilos. This is rated at 137 without fuel. That's really light. Same sort of horsepower as the Yamaha, so 32 horsepower, slightly less torque, 37 Newton meters. I think it's 40 for the Yamaha XT. And the rider who won it was Cyril Neveu, who won the first Dakar and the second. So he won in 1979 and 1980, then Honda signed him up, and he won on this bike here. So it was a big surprise. Everybody just thought BMW would walk it, but no, this little Honda won it in 1982. The year got famous because of Mark Thatcher. Now, there's a very different Honda I'm going to bring out now, and that's the bike that won in 1986. This is the Honda Africa Twin, and this is the customer version of the race bike, which was the NXR 750, and that is the bike that won Paris-Dakar in 1986. And 1986 was a tricky year for Paris-Dakar. One, it was the longest ever event. It was 15,000 kilometers in length. And two, the founder of Paris-Dakar, Thierry Sabine, was killed in a helicopter crash. In total that year, 6 people were killed on the event. It was quite shocking. But it was the year that Honda went back to the drawing board and they wanted to create a Dakar winning bike. So rather than using sort of existing bikes, this was a clean sheet design, and it's a technical tour de force. It completely dominated Dakar for 4 years. This won on the trot, so 86, 87, 88, 89, and then Honda retired it. Quite remarkable. So why was it so successful? Well, firstly, it has motocross suspension. So he's got the Pro Link suspension that we first saw on that little XT500R. Secondly, they went water cooled with the engine. It's a V-twin. The race bikes, I say, was 750 and an 800. This is a 650 version. So that's hidden away. But I just like the purposeless. There's no messing with the sump guard and all the guards on the radiators. This is a desert bike. You've got cooling fans on the radiators, so it's no problem at really high temperatures. And I love this particular bike. I found this a couple of years ago and I couldn't believe my luck. It's only done it's 28,000 kilometers now from new. This is a 1988 bike. And this bike was actually one of the original press bikes back in 1988, was out in Dakar allegedly. It has the sticker band here to say it was from the Italian motorsport team. This bike didn't actually come to the UK. UK didn't get Africa Twins until they went to 750, the RDO4 in 1990. So this was just sold in Europe. Huge tank. I think it's 24 litres, I probably need to check. Really deep tank that goes over the engine, this bigger engine. So it actually has a fuel pump because the carburetors sort of sit in the middle of the tank here. So it's that big. It gave Honda real problems because it's so big. They couldn't put it through their normal manufacturer process. Well, it just fitted. And it's a white frame bike because this is an HRC developed bike. And that's how you tell the real race ones. Like the Honda RC30, this is the same sort of family. And I just love how it is such a relaxing bike. It completely looks after you. As soon as you turn, it's that Honda perv I just started there. It's so what I would say Honda. This is another lovely touch where they try to get the suede look on the seat as well. That's what you have when you ride in the desert. It's sort of grips, and it's nice to sit on when you're doing huge distances. And they introduced, and this year, this is probably the last bike where this actual bike was sold to competitors to compete on the Dakar Rally. There was a class called a marathon class, and all you were allowed to change was suspension. You could put Olin suspension on it, and he fitted saddle tanks here, under here, to increase yet more petrol. I think he carried another 17-18 litres from the saddle tanks, and the sump guard used to carry it was 1.5–2 litres of water in a toolkit that was compulsory, and they modded that on the sump guard. So this is Honda's Africa Twin. It went on and created a whole new genre, a bit like BMW and GS. This was a really important bike in Honda's history. Now, after they retired in 1989, Yamaha had come on the scene. They've got something called a Super Tenere. They had a hot rider, Stefan Petter-Hansel. They thought he was going to win, and they were all set to win in 1990. But they didn't win 1990, and I'll go and get out the next bike, the winner of 1990 Paris-Dakar. Cagiva Elephant 900. This is a very child-friendly device, this particular bike, but boy is it a lot of fun. Now, Cagiva had been competing at Paris-Dakar for quite a while. You wouldn't believe it today, but Cagiva were using Ducati engines mid-early 80s, and actually bought out Ducati in 1985. Cagiva owned Ducati. Seems remarkable today. And they came very close to winning in 1987. It was neck and neck with the Honda Africa Twin that year, and the very last day, the Cagiva 750 at the time, I've got one of those as well in Lucky Strike colours like this, with Herbert Oriol as the rider of Cagiva that year, was leading the race. But on the final day, first of all, he had a puncture and got really tight on time. He then, pushing hard, crashed and broke both ankles on the last day and had to retire. And that left Cyril Neville able to win Dakar again on the Honda Africa Twin. But in 1990, Honda had gone, Yamaha were the new stars. But as I said earlier, Stefan Petter-Hansel retired, and Cyril Neville was also racing for Yamaha, and he blew the gearbox in his bike. And Cagiva came through with this 900. It was a proven bike by then because it had been competing a lot, and they used the engine from the 900 SS Ducati, this street raider, almost an iconic bike, in their off-roader. And it's this monster that you see here. It was Eddie Orioli who won it for Cagiva in 1990. He won it in, I think it's 1988 for Honda, so he'd won Dakar before. And it's an ace bike, this. It's very simple because it's air-cooled and it's a fair bit lighter. If I have criticism of the Honda Africa Twin, it's a bit heavy. It's about 203 kilos in its form, you see there, before you put fuel on it. This is 188 kilos, so significantly lighter. Plastic tank, air-cooled engine, so no water radiators or anything. Powerful, 68 horsepower, 77 newton meters, an easy 120 mile an hour. Very protective. I like riding this bike actually because you're fully competing here, and it's really torquey. It's got red line's 9,000 RPM. You don't use it. It's up to 7.5, but it's always there, the power. It has a dry clutch. So it has that rattle that you know from Ducatis. I've got a clear cover on it because everybody asks, what on earth is it making that noise for? And it's a dry clutch, and it has that rattle because it's slightly loose. It just means you can bang in a gear without touching the clutch. So super fast. I think there is an absolute hero to win Dakar on this bike because, as I say, it's not user friendly. by now the bikes, this is a 94 bike, so this was developed really for road use. So I've got upside down forks at the front and things like that. It hasn't got the full suspension travel with the works bikes. They were quite something in their day. Again, huge tank under here. But yeah, and they also won again in 1994, the Cagiva 900 on a bike very similar to this, because Yamaha fell out with the organiser of the Paris-Dakar, and good old reliable Cagiva won it again in 1994. Now I ought to show you, I keep mentioning this Yamaha, so that's where we'll have a look at next. I'll go and get the Yamaha Super Tenere. Brake binding. Here we are. This particular model is a 1989 Yamaha 750 Super Tenere, and this was Yamaha's answer to the Africa Twin. They looked at Africa Twin and said, we need to do something to beat that, and what they developed is a really hot motor for this bike. 5 valves per cylinder, twin cylinder, inline twin cylinder, dry sumped, gearbox sits up above it, gearbox down there. So they added horsepower. Africa Twin, the 650 when it was launched was 57 horsepower. This is 69 horsepower. It's slightly lower torque than the Cagiva, but it's a quick bike. But the rest of it, actually, the customer version is fairly crude. It's all sort of steel rims. It's a steel tank, unlike the Cagiva. What else is it? Steel suspension, a swinging arm, and things like that. So this bike is actually quite a heavy bike. It's about 216 kilos compared to 188 for the Cagiva and about 203, 204 for the Africa Twin. But in the hands of Stefan Petter Hansel, it was mighty successful. He first won in 1991, then in 92, and again in 93. 94, Yamaha didn't compete, the Cagiva won. Came back, he won it in 95. He didn't win it in 96, he was placed in 96, but his fellow works rider Eddie Orioli, who won with Cagiva weren't around then, won it in 1986, and then Petter Hansel won it in 97 and 98. And he also won the 2017 Paris-Dakar race, so he's an utter Paris-Dakar legend. As I say, he started in bikes and moved on to cars. I can't remember how many times he's won outright, but it's a lot. But yeah, so this is the final bike. So the span of bikes you see here span all the customer winning bikes from 1979, that little Yamaha XT500, all the way up to this that won in 1998. It's a remarkable sort of journey. I've really enjoyed putting the bikes together and the different characters of the bikes. What I really like about these ex-Dakar type customer bikes is they're also usable. They're like the like the SUV version of bikes. So you've got great visibility, huge tanks, very comfortable to ride, loads of torque, plenty of performance, 120 mile an hour, that'll do me, and it's mainly down to gearing. So you've got 12-second quarter mile sort of speed from these bikes. But there you go. I hope you've enjoyed this video. What I'm going to do now is do some videos on the individual bikes, and then I'll put those out over the coming weeks. So keep watching, keep subscribing. More videos are coming along very soon.